degree from the University of Montana in anthropology. She worked for several years as an archaeological consultant in North and South Dakota before coming to work at the Montana State Historic Preservation Office as the compliance and review officer. That's her official bio that she gave me, which is pretty short and sweet. I know that the SHPO office is thrilled to have her on board, and she's a great asset there. I can also tell you that the education program is glad that Jessica's here because she's always been a willing helper. She always jumps in. She's happy to do talks like this one tonight. She helps us with History Day as a judge. She helps with Archaeology Day. So we're definitely a keeper as far as we are concerned. And also, I just want to announce that she just won first place in the cultural landscape category with the photo that she took of a rock circle in Phillips County, northeast of Malta. And this was entered in a nationwide contest that was celebrating the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act. So congratulations, Jessica, and we look forward to seeing some of her photographs here.
Good evening, everyone. Let me flip this on. All right, can you hear me? Is that on? All right, can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. So welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight on this beautiful night. I decided to do this presentation tonight for a couple different reasons. The first reason was because this year is the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is a huge deal when you think about where we've come in the last 50 years. I also did this presentation because of our current exhibit, which I hope if you haven't seen it that you take time to see it. It's about the history of hunting in Montana. And it goes from early pre-contact times all the way up through modern hunting. It's a great exhibit. So basically, this presentation, I'm going to start out and give a brief overview of the history of bison hunting because I feel that's a really important basis for us to have for this presentation. Then I'm going to look at 4 specific examples of sites in Montana. And then this kind of ended up being added on as I worked on my presentation. There's a lot of new research that's come out on bison jumps, some of it in the last week that I felt I needed to share with you guys. So that's kind of how we're going to go. So the history of bison hunting. We have evidence of bison hunting in Montana for the last 12,000 years. So we had people here in Montana before 12,000 years ago. But what they're hunting are some of the larger Ice Age mammals and larger bison known as Bison antiquus. By about 12,000 years ago, you have bison on the plains that are what we know today as bison. You had a couple different kind of hunts. Now, your typical hunt, the most common hunt that people are going to be going on are what we classify as small hunts. So you have 1 or 2 people going out, walking the landscape, finding some prey, bringing them down, bringing the meat back. Much like what hunters do today. You're going out, you find a single animal, you bring it back. We have another type of hunt that we call the large hunt. This is going to be something that is much more complex and needs much more organization than these smaller hunts. The different types that we see in Montana are we have arroyo hunts. So if you've been into the southeast part of Montana, and you've seen the arroyos, so they're usually these kind of dugout channels from erosion that start with a wide entrance and then narrow. So it's a really good place to run some bison into that arroyo. They get pinched in. They have no place to go. The other types are pounds. So a pound is a type of way to do a large hunt where you basically, if you don't have a land feature available, you can build a large wooden corral and run the bison into this corral to make it easier to kill the animals. So the interesting thing about these larger hunts is even though you have the similar concept of these large hunts, they're all very different because they're all very dependent on the environment that this is taking place in. So there's always going to be these small variables. Also, from oral histories, we know that there were cultural differences. So for example, one tribe using a corral might have a corral that's 7 feet high. and in a specific shape. Maybe it's more oval. Sometimes other cultural groups have a corral that's only 5 feet high and is more round. So there were also cultural differences associated with these sites. So starting around 8000 BP, and that's what I'm going to use for this presentation is BP when I talk about any dates. BP stands for before present. So basically I'm saying 8,000 years ago. So around 8,000 years ago, we have the late Paleo, early Plains Archaic people. They're living in a Montana that is extremely warm and dry, which is what we call the altithermal. So it's a warmer climate. It's a lot drier than now. What you're getting to happen with this warm and dry weather, your grass is decreasing. It's not growing as well. What happens when you have a decrease in grass? You have less bison. So the herds are much smaller. What we see during this time is a trend of people and animals moving up into the mountains and along the mountainous areas. Because there are less bison, you're getting smaller hunts. So you're not seeing as many of these larger hunts taking place. It's going to be the small hunts that I was talking about, the hunts of opportunity. Get to the middle late Plains Archaic, about 5,000 years ago. The climate begins to change. It starts to become cooler, wetter. Grass is growing again, and therefore, you're starting to get large herds of bison. When we see this increase of our bison herds, this is when we see the emergence of bison jumps in the archaeological record. Now, not as common as all of a sudden people are doing this and they're everywhere, but they're starting to appear in random locations. And that's really important because you can't run a bison jump with a small herd. It doesn't work. Bison, for as large as they are extremely agile animals. And in a small herd, it's almost impossible to run them off. What you're relying on the bison jump is 1, their poor eyesight. 2, that you can get the leader to a point where they can't see the cliff in front of them, and they are going so fast, and there's so many behind them, that momentum takes them off. Because once that leader goes down, that's who they're following. They're all going to go down. A good example of one of these early emerging bison jumps is called Head Smashed In, which is a site up in Alberta, and it's known as an early Plains Archaic site. It's open to the public, so if you're up in the area, go visit. And then we get the late prehistoric. So we're talking 1,800 years before present. This is when we see the bison jump occurring with great frequency on the plains. A big reason for that, archaeologists believe, is not only is the environment cooperating still with them and they have these large herds, we have the bow and arrow. It's a lot easier to kill an injured bison that's fallen off a cliff with a bow and arrow than with a spear. Eventually, after the late prehistoric, we get into the pre-contact period, we start getting the horse, and that's generally believed to be what causes the decline in the use of these bison jumps. Oops, sorry about that. It is important to note, though, that in oral history traditions, there are stories of horses being used to help herd the bison over the cliff, basically being used to supplement what I'm going to talk about later, these drive lines. So, like a lot of things in history, it's not it was detrimental or it helped. It was a mix of the situation going on. Plus, then you have Europeans coming into the country and decimating the bison herd. I wanted to do this talk, and this was something I dealt with, and a lot of archaeologists, I think, deal with, and a lot of the public. There is a bison jump myth. And I got this quote from Dr. Mark Baumler. Dr. Baumler is the State Historic Preservation Officer. He's my boss. And so I thought it was really poignant and basically sums up what I'm trying to say. People think of bison jumps and they think of these 100-foot cliffs that these bison are just falling off of and, just kind of this real dramatic scene. But in truth, like Mark says, most of them 20 to 30 feet in height. They're not all that dramatic. A lot of times, you will go past one, and unless you know it's there, it's not going to stand out to you. And I wanted to put this up there also because I thought it was important to show that this is not a myth that is just among the public. This is a myth among archaeologists as well, especially until you come up in this area and actually get to see and experience these places for yourself. So, what is a bison jump? There's a lot of variations in bison jumps. They tend to have similar qualities, but all are extremely different from each other because they're all in different environments. Even if it's a similar place, a similar landscape, there are going to be small variations that mean that things have to change to make these bison jumps work. First off, we have 3 variations. We have the steep bank, a perpendicular bluff, an ascending scarp. So steep banks you see, such as along rivers, they've been cut out by water. Perpendicular bluffs tend to be some kind of rock outcrop. And then you have ascending scarps. And ascending scarps are associated with terraces that have a flat, gently sloping side, but then they end at a drop-off on the other side. And it's usually created by some kind of stream or water action. So besides the actual jump point, we have a couple other features. We have drive lines. Drive lines are usually made up of cairns or solid rock lines. And that's what I have the pictures up here from. So you can see here, is one cairn. That's part of a drive line at a site. This is another bison jump. And you see it's not just the clusters of rock, it's just a straight line of rock going across the landscape. So these vary as well. We have the bone bed. Obviously, that's where the bison fell. That's where initial butchering took place. And it's important to note about the bone bed that sometimes these layers can be meters deep. So if you ever go to one of these sites, or if you've been to one, you're not just walking up and there's like 20 bones on the ground. You're like, oh, that's kind of cool. We're talking over your head, feet thick layers of bison bone from the number of animals that they've been running off this cliff or this bluff for thousands of years. It's also important to note, and we'll see this at later sites, that bone beds are a part of the site that show that they were not consecutively used. So you're not going back to a bison jump once a year and using it. You just put 200 animals off this cliff. You think a bison's going anywhere near that? Even if they can't see the edge, it smells. Because they're getting so much meat from these animals, they're not using a lot of the animals. There's a lot of decomposition going on for several years after. And then we have the camps and processing areas. All right, you put all this effort in, you're not going to go far from here. So you got areas where people are camping, where they're processing the meat, they're going to tan the hides, all that kind of stuff. So this is a whole tribal thing. This is not just the men. This is the whole group of people. I put together this map to show bison jumps in Montana. So right now, we have 283 recorded bison jumps in the state of Montana. The color variation shows how dense the jumps are in different counties. So for example, we have the most bison jumps in Glacier County and in Cascade County. Cascade County has 28 bison jumps and Glacier County has 32 recorded bison jumps. And then variations. Now this map is really interesting. It shows a lot of different things. First of all, there's none in the mountains. We get a lot right here along the Rocky Mountain front. They're out on the plains. This is empty. Okay, well that says a lot about the environment they're looking for to use. Plus, you're going to have less bison up in the high altitudes in these mountains. The bison are out on the plains. Now we got the rivers. Remember I talked about how a lot of the features that they're using as jumps are caused by water action. This is the Missouri, the Milk River. You see a lot of bison jumps up where these major rivers are. You see them down here. So that's another thing that we look at that explains. Now, I know that this map has some gaps, such as Treasure County, Daniels, Prairie. Some of this is just from a lack of knowledge and knowing where sites are. You know, up in Phillips and Blaine County, there's a lot of BLM land, which means there's been a lot of archaeological survey done. You have other counties with less federal land that aren't being impacted by Section 106, the federal law. That is basically how most archaeology is done. You're not going to find as much stuff. So I'm willing to bet that some of these counties have bison jumps. We just don't know about them yet. This is another map I found that kind of shows you the same thing, but actually plots out specific bison kill sites. This is from about 1977. So we found more since then, but still a really good representation. I mean, you can see right where Glacier County is. There's Cascade County. Right where these big clusters are that are showing up along these major waterways. And again, nothing here. They're following this Rocky Mountain front. Another interesting thing about this map that I just wanted to point out, and I'll talk about a little bit later with a specific site, is you'll see that it says mined bison kills. And I don't know if anyone here knows or has seen a bison kill being mined. It happened much more in the 30s and the 40s. Basically, during that time, it's the Great Depression, then we're going to get into World War II. They're mining these bison kill sites for fertilizer because they're short on other materials. So we had a lot of destruction during that time of these bison kill sites, especially if they were already known. And people are out there way before archaeologists really, there's not a lot of archaeologists out there at this time, period. I'm going to start with my first site. So, like I said, I'm going to talk about 4 sites. I decided not only to talk about sites that you all can visit, so you can see these places for yourself, but I kind of went from a north to south. So if I go back to this map, I'm going to start with Wahkpa Chug'un. Then I'm going to go, this is Ompishkin, which is now First Peoples. I'm going to go to Madison, and then I'm going to go to Keogh, which is over here. So starting up in the north, Wahkpa Chug'un, right outside Havre. Super easy to get to. Highway 2. This is a big shopping area. Right behind it, and you know, if you've ever been to the shopping area and didn't know, that is a bison jump right behind it. It's a great place to go. They've done a lot of good work. Now this one is not state-owned. I think there's a small fee to go visit, but if you're interested in this, well worth the visit. It's a really unique site for a lot of reasons. So Wahkpa Chug'un means little or small river. It's a Assiniboine name for the Milk River, which you can see flowing right by the site. It's not a traditional name for the site. This name was given to the site by archaeologists who were excavating at the site. The bluff here varies about 30 to 72 feet. So I'm talking about along here, it's going to vary that much in height. So again, tall in some places, but you know, nothing overly impressive. You know, we're not talking 200 feet drop, 30 to 72 feet. The site was discovered in 1961. A local made a comment to an archaeologist from Havre that a large amount of bison bone was taken out when the railroad was put through. So he ended up going out there, taking a look at the site, and eventually it was excavated by the Milk River Archaeological Society of Havre. Unfortunately, and this is a good map to show you, there's not a lot remaining of the site. Remember I talked about all those different elements of a bison jump? Well, you pretty much have the bone bed. Any drive lines? Long gone. This is all developed. The drive lines would have been coming out here onto the plains. Also, because of the railroad cutting through and the river, we don't know where the camp and processing areas were for this site. Now, there's a lot of archaeology up here, and there are sites up here, but whether they're associated with this kill site, we just don't know. So this is a sketch map from 1976 from some of the first excavations at the site. And I wanted to show you this because it's really important. This is a really complex site. So you can see we have the edge here, the railroad here. We know the river's right here. Then we have area A, area B, C, and D. And I'll come back to that as I'm talking about these different areas. So when they were excavating the site, they determined that there were 3 different occupations or uses in terms of time period for this site. Now, that doesn't mean that these people didn't use the site more than once. Basically, it's being broken down into cultural group that use the site. The earliest that we have are the Bison people. Now, they've dated the Bison use at the site from about 2,000 to 1,200 years BP. So 2,000 years ago. So we're talking, if you remember back when I say when bison jumps are emerging, this is one of those bison jumps. This is during the time that they're emerging. So when you look at this, that's going to be this lower layer here. And you look at how thick that is. And again, I liked this photo here because this gives you an idea how deep we're talking, how deep these deposits go, and how thick the bone layers are. This is no small undertaking here. So the Bison people, we found evidence of the Bison at this site in all 3 of these excavated areas. But the most bone was found in area A, which leads us to believe that when they're using this jump, they're driving the bison off somewhere from this part into area A. They have done taphonomic studies, which means they've looked at the bison bone, trying to determine age and sex. And based on these studies, they do know that most of these kills were done in the fall and the springtime. And as you'll see as we go through, that's typical for bison jumps. You're never going to see bison jumps in the summer, which has a lot to do with bison behavior. Like I said before, we don't know where the camp and processing areas are. Probably we're up here. I'm sure the rivers moved to. They're gone. We don't know. Another interesting fact about this area A and the Bison phase is the most common artifact that was found in this area were projectile points. Okay, if you're running bison off a cliff, you don't need projectile points if they're dead. That means a lot of these animals are surviving. And surviving to the point where you don't want to get close. So you're using your bow and arrow. So most of these animals are being dispatched at the bottom after they've fallen, but they're not dead. So about 200 to 150 years later, you get the Avonlea people coming. So we can see this next layer in the bone bed. So this is about 800, 700 years before present. So the Avonlea people use this site, but not to the same extent the Bison people did. And this is also interesting because not only are they using the site, but they are also a cultural group of people that are contemporary with the Bison people. They appear in the archaeological record about 18,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago. And in Montana, they overlap with the Bison. So they're not a continuation of the basalt culture using the same site. They're a completely different cultural group coming in and utilizing the site as a bison jump. So going back to this, for the Avonlea people, they show up in the archaeological record in Area C, not Area A. So they're using this site, but they're using a different part of the site than the Bison people were. There are thin layers of these people in Area D and Area A, but this is where we're seeing them. What we also see with the Avonlea people is, especially in Area A, we're finding hearths and firecrack rock. So where with the Bison people, we didn't know where they're camping and processing all of these bison. Okay, so then we have a thinner bone bed layer for the Avonlea people. They're actually camping on site, processing these animals on site. Very different than the Bison people. And then lastly, our top layer, we have old women's phase. So old women's phase is about 500 to 50 BP. Oops. So 50 BP, that's not very long ago. That's 50 years ago. Oh, wow, and I totally did my math wrong. I meant 150 BP. I apologize. There's actually oral traditions that place a jump occurring at this site in 1850. And that's when we think the last time this jump was used. So similar to the Bison, old women are using Area A. And we see them in Area B, C, and D, but as their camps and their processing areas. There's an interesting thing, though, about the old women's phase. So when we see the Bison Avonlea using this as a bison jump, old women's phase isn't using this as a bison jump. They're using it as a pound. They are running in the animals to this area in a built-in corral. They're not running them over the edge. So that makes this a very interesting site because it's not only used as a jump, but it has other uses. Something very unique about it that lets these people use this area to kill bison in 2 different ways. And this is how we know that. This is an old photo from the 1971 report. This is a post hole from the corral. And what they're doing is on these post holes, they're taking bison skulls and putting them into the holes, helping hold the wood of these post holes up on their corral structure. This is our next site, First Peoples, formerly known as Wahkpa. Another one, please go. This is a state park right outside Great Falls. You can see it from the interstate. The interstate is right over here. Great site to go to. This is what we call an ascending scarp. When I was talking about the different types of bison jumps, you can see you have this really flat, open area that gently slopes up and then a drop off. Perfect for moving bison up into the right area. It's on a plateau that's called Taft Hill. It's right outside Great Falls, like I said. This is one site where we have lost some information. This site was used for the mining of fertilizer, as I mentioned before. This was done in the 1940s. Now, let me give you an idea how big this bone bed is. In the 1940s, when they're moving the bone, they removed 150 tons of bison bone. There's still 4 times that out there at this site. This site has been so heavily utilized. It's really amazing. And that much can be removed, and there's still that much left. Again, I'm trying to give you the scale of what these people are doing and the numbers of animals that they're killing when they're running them over the cliff. It's an amazing undertaking. The site was first visited by an archaeologist named Schmidt in 1947 when they were removing the bone bed for the fertilizer. By 1968, the University of Montana had done some excavations at the site. And by 1972, it became a state park and was protected. So some recent work was done at this site. That's where I got this image from. It's from Auberg's 2008 report. What you see happening at a lot of these sites, especially in the 60s and 70s when the universities are going in and excavating, they're going straight for the bone bed. No one's looking at anything else. They want the good stuff. They want to go where they know they're going to be finding artifacts. So what you'll see a lot in the last 10, 20 years are people finally going out and trying to look at the larger landscape of these jumps, not just the bone bed. So what we see here is they have identified a main kill site or bone bed, which is on the southeast side of the plateau, which is going to be right here. So if you've ever been to the site, or you go, the visitor center's way down here. And then this is the main kill. If you go and visit, you can actually drive up this road, and you can come up, and there's a visitors area and walking paths. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here. Now, they got some C14 dates from this southeastern Maine bone bed, and the dates were 1000 BP, 805 BP, and 570 BP. So showing a consistent use, over about 500 years, just in this one bone bed. Now, these dates put this bone bed in use into some groups we were talking about before, Avonlea and Old Women's. So the same kind of cultural group utilizing this bison, which makes sense, we're not that far from Havre, using this at that same time period. Similar to Wahkpa Chug'un, the taphonomy at this site indicates that it was used in the fall and the wintertime. No big surprises there. Now, what is interesting is that while in the 70s or in the 60s they're focusing on this bone bed, there's obviously a lot more going on at this site. First of all, some of these lines don't go anywhere near it. All right, what's going on there? Well, what we do know now is there's additional bone beds. So, as you can see from these drive lines, we have a lot coming down this way. We have some coming out this way. We have a whole bunch coming up here. These people are opportunistic. We're talking about working with a large herd of bison, not a predictable animal, and kind of wants to do its own thing. So it doesn't make sense on a landscape like this to say we have to put them here. That's where they're going. No. If it makes sense to put them this way, then you start using these drive lines. A lot of times these drive lines are out there and they're picking and using them as they see the opportunity to, or as they think that that's how this is going to go. These are the drive lines. It's hard to see. They're actually little green dots marking every single cairn that makes up this drive line. Unfortunately, because of the interest in the main bone bed, we have no dates for these other bone beds. We don't know when they were utilized. I will say that projectile points have been found at the site that date back to 5000 BP. So whether that means people are using this as a bison jump 5,000 years ago, I don't know. It's also a pretty prominent feature in the landscape. I'm sure people were using this feature way before they're using it for bison jumps. At least with this one, compared to Wahkpa Chug'un, all this has been destroyed. This gives us a hint of what's going on. So this is what it looks like when you're up at the top. The initial drop at this jump is only 10 to 20 feet. It's not very high. So you see that right here, about 10 to 20 feet. It's that initial drop. It leads to a slope, which you see here. This slope is about 20 to 30 feet, and then there's another drop off right here. What's interesting about this site, this is the bone bed. The bison aren't making it over this last ledge. They're falling here, rolling here, and you're having the bone bed right in this area. That's unusual for a bison jump. You think that they'd be going all the way down to the bottom. They're not. But it's also only a 10 to 20 foot drop. You're not going to get a lot of momentum compared to some of the other jumps, especially the ones we're going to see coming up. We also know that the camps and processing areas for this jump are out here on this flat. They had a little bit of ways to go to get to these bison up here that they're killing and butchering. Now, when the work in 2008 was completed at this site, they found something so unusual, they actually didn't know what it was when they first found it, because it's never been found anywhere. Not on a bison jump in Montana, not on a bison jump in Canada, Wyoming, anywhere. Completely unique in North America. And so after doing some research, talking to local tribes and getting oral histories, they came up with a name. They called them trip walls. What they think the people are doing here is stacking up rocks, especially along the parts of the jump that aren't as tall as other parts, basically kind of creating their own jump or creating this barrier that the bison, before they even go over, they're going to stumble. They're already kind of going head first, getting that additional momentum. We've never seen that before. And you can see it. There's another one here. They're all along this side of the jump, which I will show you is along this side here. Not where this main kill site is. Oops. All right, the next jump, Madison. Again, I don't know if you guys have been there. This is a state park. Get off the interstate, go about 6 miles south, you're there. So please go visit it. It's a great site. And that's why I pick these places, because I want you guys, if you're really interested, you can go there. You can see what I'm talking about. You can experience this place for yourself. Madison Bison Jump, not far from Three Forks. This is the Madison River over here. Like I said, it's a state park. Like a lot of the other bison jumps, it was excavated early. It was known early. This was first excavated in 1930. There were a lot of subsequent excavations of this site, including one by the Montana State University. So like I said before, though, these guys are interested in the bone bed. There was never actually a survey done of this whole site until 2014. 2 years ago. They finally went out there and looked at this whole site to see what was out there. And it was completed by the University of Montana. This is an old sketch map, but I like it because it's pretty simple. It shows the basics of the site. So you're going to have drive lines, the jump, the bone deposit. Down here, they found a whole bunch of teepee rings, so we know this was their camp and processing area. There's also teepee rings that are found up on this ridge just north of the site. And notice this. Here they call them smoke signal piles. I'm going to get back to those in a little bit. So this site's really interesting because they basically identify it as being made up of 5 different components. So unlike the other ones where there's agriculture or it's been destroyed by a shopping center, we can see on this one they actually identified what they think is a gathering area. So they think that people are actually bringing in the bison from somewhere else and causing them to gather up here in this area before moving them. Now you have to think, when you're doing a bison jump, this is not a, hey, let's have a bison jump. We'll go get some bison, run them off the cliff, 3 hours max. We're talking days, weeks of planning where the herd, slowly moving them into position. This is an exercise in patience. What's interesting, too, about this gathering area is this is an area we know has been used by people for thousands of years, not just for bison jumping. So there's also a quarry up here where we know people are getting cherts, chalcedonies, and petrified wood. You know, it's kind of nice. You're going to have this bison jump, have to kill these bison. You need a lot of stone tools for this butchering, and you got a quarry right here. Honestly, this is a great site. It has everything you need. Interestingly about this site, there's only 3 to 4 drive lines. Now, if you ever go to the site and actually hike up to the top, it's really not that wide. So if you get the bison going in, there's not a lot of places for them to go. So there's not a lot of drive lines coming off of this site, which makes sense, because unlike the other ones we've seen where you have a whole area, okay, maybe we'll send them off this way. Maybe it's easier to go this way. You really have one way to go once you're getting them up there. So here's some pictures of the jump. The initial drop-off of this jump is 25 to 40 feet all along this edge. Again, a little bit taller than what we saw at First Peoples, a little bit shorter than at Wahkpa Chug'un, but still, 25 to 40 feet is really not that big of a drop. What's impressive about this site, and I tried to show it in the photos, but unless you're there, let me tell you, this is a steep slope. Very steep slope. Once you come off that edge, you are rolling all the way down. You're not stopping. That slope is 150 feet long, with the bone bed right about here where I'm standing when I took this picture, which is the main bone bed and the butchering area. So, you know how I said that this site was first excavated in the 1930s? It was excavated then again in the 50s and the 60s. We don't have any good notes. We don't know what they were finding. It isn't until 1962 when Carling Maloof with the Montana State University excavated out here that we actually have notes on what they're finding. And he finds that there are 3 distinct layers of bison bones. So it's going to be very similar if you picture what we saw at Wahkpa Chug'un at this site. And in between each bone layer is sterile soil. Another interesting thing about the site is they found very few projectile points in the bison beds. Remember at Wahkpa Chug'un, tons of projectile points in the bone bed. They having to kill the animals after they go over. Here, not so much. These animals aren't making it. They're either dead on impact or so hurt that they believe one method of butchering the animals and not wasting arrows, you just take a big rock, bash it over the head. At this point, they're so injured, you can get right up to them. Similar to the other sites, the heaviest and most consistent use at this site, late prehistoric. So 450 to 200 years before present, falling right in that same range as all the other sites that we're seeing. Now, MSU did get a carbon-14 date that was 1440 years before present from down in the earliest bone bed. So the site may have been used at the beginning of the bison jump cycle when it's starting to become a method, but most of the evidence for the site is late prehistoric. At least that's when it's being used consistently. Now, like I said, there wasn't a lot of information. No taphonomic studies were done at the site, but I would put a good wager that this was used in the fall, winter, or spring. So now we have the occupation area of the site, which is right here. So you see there's this drainage. So I'm kind of standing up in the bone bed right here. You have this drainage, and then this is where all the stone circles are. They're still there. Now, I went and looked for them a couple weeks ago. I couldn't find them. The grass is really thick, but they're there, and there's a lot of hearths there too. So overall at this site, you had 3 areas of stone circles, or teepee rings. You had up here, you had that one that I showed you up on the ridge, and actually, during the 2014 study, they found stone circles up here. Now, people are going to be camping up there when you're running the bison off. So that probably is a campsite associated with people just moving through and utilizing the area in general. Overall, between those 3 areas, we have 78 stone circles found at the site. It's a huge number. When you figure if you have a stone circle that's about 4 to 5 meters in diameter, it can house about 4 to 5 people, and you have 78 of them, this is a huge gathering of people at these sites, which makes sense. Like I said, you got to have a big group of people to be running all these bison off. It's a group effort. So remember I talked about those smoke signal piles? Oops. This is one of them. Well, when they went back in 2014 to look at them, they don't think they're smoke signal piles. It's kind of an old way of thinking about these. What they actually think these are, and again, this is using oral traditions and working with the tribes, but they think that these are fasting beds located right up here above the jump. Well, that makes sense. And I haven't talked about this a lot because I'm more talking about the sites and their archaeology, but these aren't just exercises in getting meat to feed your family, to feed your kin. There's ritual involved. This is important. This is a huge deal. This is planning and time. There are shamans out there. There are people performing rituals to ensure the success of this. Because if it doesn't succeed, that is a huge waste of time and effort to fail. What are you going to do then? You were counting on this. So, makes sense that we have these ritualistic features at these kinds of sites. Another interesting thing about this site that we haven't found at any other bison jumps, at least the 3 that I've talked about, you're getting a larger variety of artifacts. So most bison jumps, you have firecrack rock, you have different types of stone tools, lithics, some groundstone, bone fragments, your run-of-the-mill archaeological stuff. What they're finding here at this site is pottery. Not the most common thing in Montana. They're also finding pipe fragments and beads. So something is going on here that's very different than what we're seeing at the other ones. This is the last jump I'm going to talk about, the Keogh Bison jump. Now, unlike the other 3, I must put this out there, which are open to the public, Keogh Bison jump is owned privately. It's in private land. But Mr. Keogh is very good about sharing this amazing archaeological site on his property if you contact him. But please don't go and wander up there. So this site is in Stillwater County. It's along the Stillwater River, which you can see going through here. And like I said, it's privately owned. His farm is actually down here. This is my favorite bison jump, because this one's kind of crazy compared to the other ones. They're very straightforward. This one's very different. So this is the steep cliff jump that I was talking about. You can see, pretty steep. Now this site, actually we have known oral traditions specifically about the use of this bison jump. The Crow tells stories of a jump along this river that they called Where Buffaloes Are Driven Over Cliffs at Long Ridge. And because of these stories, we know that this jump was used up into the 1800s. But similar to a lot of the jumps that we have, most use was in the prehistoric, late prehistoric times, very similar to all the ones we looked at. Now, compared to the other ones, this cliff is a 60-foot drop. That's twice the size of some of the ones we're seeing before. That's a pretty good drop, and I've climbed it. I would not want to jump off of it, I can tell you. So you have this 60-foot cliff. This slope is 100 feet, and they call it a steep slope. So this is, I've climbed up. Here's that cliff. This is the steep slope. It's really steep. Almost hand over foot climbing up this thing. It's extremely steep. So you can imagine, once you go off this, you're coming all the way down, just like Madison. And honestly, if you survive this, especially as a bison and you got about 50 others coming behind you and landing on top of you, you're lucky. Interestingly, though, about this site, despite the fact that we know when it was used, and it was used several times, the bone bed here is only 5 feet deep. Okay, so you imagine Wahkpa Chug'un, where you see those people, and the bone bed, if it's from the floor, it's like way above their heads. 5 feet. I'm wearing heels. I'm about 6 feet. So, about to my shoulders. That's not a very deep bone bed. And this site has no stratification. So at the other sites, where we're seeing a kill event, sterile soil being laid down, a couple hundred years later, another kill event, soil being laid down. That's not happening here. It's a jumble of bone. Oops. So, but I think that says a lot more about the environment here than in the other places. You're just not getting the soil laying down. And we see that at archaeological sites. Sometimes it takes thousands of years to get 2 inches of soil laid down on a site. Sometimes it takes 50 years. It all depends. So, now here is the sketch map. Already looks crazy compared to what we've seen before, right? This is from the 1998 report by Larry Laren. What are they doing here? You're starting with the bison up an area called Horseman Flats. Now, Horseman Flats is an area where, according to Crow oral traditions, the bison would gather up here in the wintertime. Now, this has this is something that we see even in the current times. I mean, if you talk to locals, herds of Pronghorn will sit up in these flats in the wintertime. People keep their cattle up here in the wintertime. The crow, it's called Horseman Flats because the crow would keep their horses up here in the wintertime. This is an area, because of its location and how it's kind of buffered, even though you've got these, the Absaroka Mountains right here, it's keeping pretty clear in the wintertime. There's grass available for these animals to eat. It's a protected area. So it makes sense that they're wintering there. Now, unlike the other ones where we see them coming from a flat, pushing them almost straight down, look at this. That's a 90-degree turn. They're making a 90-degree turn with 200 bison. I mean, can you even imagine? So they're bringing them down off this flat. They're bringing them almost to the edge. This is a cairn, a drive line right here of cairns. Bringing them further to the east, then turning them again to that jump. Okay, what's going on here? You just brought them down here. Why not just drive them off? It's right there. That's still a cliff, still a 60-foot drop. Why aren't they just dropping here? Why are they turning them? Especially because once you get them going this way, this is an easy slope down off of this ridge line. I know, because that's how I came down. I wasn't walking down the slope. But it's easy. All they have to do is keep going. And they're home free. Well, the thing about bison jumps, like I said before, bison, they might have poor eyesight, but they still can see. And they're extremely agile. You can see the cliff here. They're not going to run toward it. They can see it. They know it's there. The angle and slope of this area happens to be, they can't see it here. That's why they're bringing them all the way over here. Now, there's a couple of other interesting features about the site, besides the fact that it has a 90-degree turn, which, honestly, I don't think I've ever seen a bison jump with a turn like that, ever. The drive lines here are really bizarre. So at most of these sites, we're seeing drive lines that are small rock cairns. So we're talking maybe 10 rocks in a cairn every 15 feet or so, laying it out so the people can stand. They know their places. They got the map. They know where they're going. It's different here. You see all three different kinds of drive line here. You see large rock cairn drive lines. You see small rock cairn drive lines. And you see the straight, continuous rock line at this site. But that's not the only weird thing. They run parallel to each other. So this here is one of the large rock cairns. The lines are when I took this picture, they're running across. So there's going to be another large cairn up here, another large cairn here. But if you can see right here, a little line of rock running parallel. Why do you need two? I don't know. We don't know. Archaeologists don't know. We don't know. We've never seen this before. Again, this is the only site, and I don't know if it has to do with making that 90-degree turn, because that's unusual. We've never seen this before. We've never seen these parallel lines. I mean, that's, maybe 2 feet in between them. They're not running the bison down that little narrow stretch. What are they doing? We don't know. There is some speculation that these lines were built by different cultural groups of people. That's why they're different. But to that I say, if I already have this here, why am I wasting my time with that? But I don't know. Something yet to be discovered at these sites.
How big are those rocks?
These rocks are about bowling ball size. And lastly about this site, Laren speculated that a corral was used at this site. You can see he has it drawn in here. But what's really cool is you can see it in one of my pictures too. And again, why would you need a corral? These animals are probably dead by the time they reach this point. There's no good answer. My speculation would be it might possibly have been to slow the momentum of the bison coming down the hill and keeping them from, but I don't know. So here again is my picture, looking up at the jump. Here's the main jump. But look, I'll go back. There is a distinct rock line that comes exactly where he has his corral drawn. Makes sense to me. They found post holes too. So those are the 4 I looked at. I want to briefly give you guys some information on new research that's been done, because this is really exciting stuff. I mean, the stuff I'm talking about has been over the last 50 years, but this is continuing. Archaeologists are still doing this work. A lot of this new work is much less invasive than digging up a bone bed, because we all know archaeology, you dig something up, it's gone. It's destroyed. Nothing left. So if you don't do it right the first time, you're in trouble. So the first one I want to talk about is the Henry Smith burn, which is also the photo that I won the photo contest with, was a photo from this site. Henry Smith is a bison jump up along the Milk River, just north of Malta. What they did there was in this amazing study where they did a prescribed burn over the whole top part. So they knew where the bone bed was. Again, that had been excavated in the 50s and the 60s. We wanted to see what was up above. They burned the whole top part in 2 different burns and flew a drone over the site to map the stone features. Thousands of stone features at this site. Look for it. There will be archaeological reports coming out, probably in Plains or the Society for American Archaeology. I didn't want to steal Josh's thunder, but this is one image taken from a drone of a human effigy figure at that site. Incredible. Stone circles, drive lines that go for a good quarter to half a mile, human effigy figures. The site is unbelievable. Another piece of work that's being done is a landscape study in the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. So we're talking kind of up in that Glacier County area where we have all those bison jumps. What they're doing there is they're looking at what they're calling landscape engineering. So they're looking not just at, okay, we have a bison jump. Awesome. They're looking at the whole landscape. What is the landscape this bison jump is in? While they've been doing this along the Two Madison River, they have identified 11 driveline systems in a 20-mile area. 11 systems. That's incredible. They put out an article. They say that one of the drive lines they found had 2,816 cairns. That's insane. So again, this just goes back to my point that this is not something that you're just like, I'm going to do this one day. This takes planning and groups of people and days and time and effort. Another new article, and actually this was brought to attention by my boss, Mark Baumler, just came out in the Society for American Archaeology journal about GIS modeling. Some students from the University of Wyoming went to the Wold Bison Jump in Wyoming and basically used GIS to model and figure out, why is the bison jump here? Why? Why is it this particular spot? Well, basically on their modeling, what they figured out was visual obscurity is the #1 variable in the placement of a bison jump. So remember when I said before when we were talking about Keogh, why aren't they just driving them straight when they come off that Horseman Flat? It didn't have enough visual obscurity. They could see it. They can actually calculate like precise angles and distance from the edge where the bison have to be, that they have too much momentum and they go over. So using this, they came up with a 2-step predictive model, which takes this visual obscurity plus a low-cost path. So what does a low-cost path mean? That means if I'm looking at a hill and there's a path that kind of slowly goes up and then there's a path that goes straight up, I'm taking the slower one. It's a lot lower cost for me to take that easier path up. So using that and the visual obscurity, they believe that this predictive model can predict where new bison jumps will be, ones that we haven't found yet. It hasn't been used yet, but I hope it's used soon. And this is the last one I'm going to talk about. This also just came out. I saw this in the archaeological news. A high-altitude bison jump. This is crazy. This blows so much of what we thought we knew about bison jumps completely out of the water. And it just came out last week. Basically, climate change. Everyone's heard of climate change. Things are melting high up in the mountains. Well, archaeologists are what they're doing what they call high-altitude archaeology. They're actually going up to these areas, into these ice patches where things are melting, and seeing what they can find before it's all gone. So a group of University of Wyoming students went up. This is the Wind River Range in Wyoming. They weren't looking for a bison jump. They're just up there recording and seeing what they can see. They found a cairn. Okay, walked 15 feet, found another cairn. They followed a cairn line to a small edge, which I know you can't see in this photo, and a bison kill site and campsite on this little flat way up in these mountains. To give you an idea of how high we're talking, Keogh is about 5,000 feet above sea level. This site is 10,160 feet above sea level. It's insane. We have never looked for bison jumps up this high. We didn't think they'd be up here. They actually think there's a pass right here. The bison are coming up. Now, this could change our dates. Remember how I said we have that time period when everything is warm and dry? Animals, people are moving into the mountains. What if they're using bison jumps up in the mountains at that time? I don't know. They don't have dates for this site yet. So keep your eyes out. This stuff is all in the news. Look out for it. Things are changing, especially with bison jumps. We don't know much. But if I could do a little bit today to dispel the myth that you have a 200-foot cliff that you're just willy-nilly running bison off of, I hope you understand now that it's a lot more subtle than that, but also very specific in the landscape they're looking at. It took an incredible understanding of not only bison as animals, but the landscape that they're running them over to even pull this off. This is an amazing feat. So please, check out some of these sites, especially the state park ones. If you're a Montana resident, it's free. Go check them out. They're great. Please go see our exhibit. So thank you, everyone.